So in this module, we're actually going to get into do some actual coding and figure out what the syntax is required to do that. So in order to start, I'm going to first have to create a project. So I'm in Eclipse here, and I'm going to say File, New, Java Project, as you've learned in previous modules. And I'm just going to call this Output. Just keep it simple. And I'm going to hit Finish. Now, of course, I'm already working in my workspace that I've set up previously. Now there's nothing in here at this point, but I'm going to right click on source and I'm going to say new class, and I'm going to create my main class, and I want it to have my public static void main in there, and immediately it creates everything up. Everything that we need is already here. We don't have to do anything special. We're going to be working inside of this section here, the main section. For the beginning of these modules, all of your code is going to exist inside of this main. We are going to extend outside of that in the not too distant future, but for now, pretty much all your code is going to go in here. Now, we have to learn a few things about Eclipse in order to do this. First of all, whenever we're doing output in Eclipse, our output, when we run our program, will show up down here in this console tab. So we'll see out here in the previous example that I was running when I was testing, I output a value of 2. So that's why you see that number 2 there. If this tab isn't here for some reason, you can access it by clicking on Window, Show View, and then Console. And that should make it appear. Now, what you need to realize is that whenever we're doing output in Eclipse, or in Java, I should say, we need to somehow inform the compiler that we want to display text. In order to do that, anything that we want to display, we simply surround it in some quotes. Hello. When Java sees that, it's going to interpret hello as text. The same thing would work if I put in 55. It doesn't see 55, it sees quote 55. It sees the word 55. It has no numeric value whatsoever at this point. So let's get into the syntax and figure out what we can actually do now. In Java, there are two options for doing standard text output. The first option is this, system.out.println, and then some text that we want to display. For now, I'm just going to do the standard hello world program that you'll see if you try and learn any language online. Now let's break this down a little bit. So system is basically a keyword that implies the foundation of most Java commands. It's just like the root. Out, sorry, let me back up a little bit. You'll see that in between all of our keywords here, there's these little dots. The dot operators essentially mean ownership. Out is owned by system. It's a command owned by system, or really it's a set of commands owned by system. What it really means is that it's doing output to the screen. Just like print line is owned by out. So it just creates like a chain of ownership. Notice that I called it print line. Println is short for print line. Now, what we're saying here is, from the basic system, I want to output to the screen a single line. And on that line, I want to display the text, hello world. We see that we have round brackets here. These round brackets contain any information that is needed by the last command there in order to do its job. So for example, I couldn't print line if I had nothing inside of here because it wouldn't know what to print. So obviously it needs something. In this case, I'm giving it specific text to output. I could just as well put a number in here and it will display that number on the screen, no problem. But we want to keep it as text because that's pretty straightforward. So all the information that is needed for the command to do its job is inside the brackets. Now some commands require one piece of information like here. Some don't require any. Others require a lot. But in this case, all we do is require one. If we do have more than one, we would just separate them with commas and then more values, however many there are. Now, oops. Go back here. Okay. And then finally we see that the line is ended off with a semicolon. Just like in an English sentence where we end off our sentences with a period, in our code, we're always going to end off any command with a semicolon. In this case, we are commanding the system to output to the screen a single line of text that's hello world, and we end our system with that semicolon. So this is our first option for displaying information to the screen. Now, if we were to run our program, either clicking the Go button over here or the F11 key, now I got to save my work, and then we see down on the bottom of the screen in the console window, Hello World. Very simple. So that is the first option for displaying information on the screen. What you need to realize, though, is how this actually works. Now, you see this little flashy line here wherever I click. That's called a cursor. You see this in Word all the time. It essentially means that is the next place where text is going to go if I start typing. A cursor denotes the location of text. The same thing happens in output. In the very beginning of the program, the cursor actually exists right here at the left of the screen. When this line of code is called and executed, then that text appears exactly where that cursor was. What print line does is essentially says, print this line of text and then move the cursor down to the beginning of the next line. That's what print line does. That leads me into our second command that we have. Very similar to print line, this one is just system.out.print. What's the difference? Not a whole lot. The difference lies with the cursor. So in print line, it forces the cursor down to the beginning of the next line. For print, it actually keeps it on the same line. So what we can do with this is we can actually start manipulating certain things. So for example, this might be useful if you're trying to display multiple things on the same line. If you're trying to format certain things, maybe you want to display like an item on one side of the output and then a value on the second side of the output, like a top 10 scoreboard or something like that. So you could use print commands instead of print line commands and manipulating all sorts of things. It can create a much easier system. So anyways, above and beyond that, that is pretty much it for the print command. There's not a whole lot more to go into this. What we do need to realize, though, is that we can run into problems. Remember that we have syntax, that grammar of our language that we must follow, those rules. And if we break that syntax, the whole thing breaks down. What if, for example, we forgot to put the quotes in here? Well, if we forgot to put this quotes in, we can already see that there's an error. It's underlined in red, there's an X in the corner, and that tells us that there's a problem. But if I try to run my program anyway, first thing's going to happen, it's going to ask me to save because I forgot to save. But after that, it's going to tell me that there's a problem. Errors in workspace. Proceed with launch. The answer is cancel. It is always cancel. It's cancel because if we do proceed, essentially it's going to run the last version of the program that was working. That's effectively useless to us because that means it doesn't have any of the changes that we just made. So always hit cancel, solve your problem, and try again. So how do we solve our problem? Well, we go over, we put our mouse over this X, and it gives us a clue as to the problem. Multiple markers in this line, that's not really helpful to us. Let's shorten down the text a little bit. Let's just output hello. Now if I go over the mouse, it tells us, well, really the same thing. It's trying to give us some ideas about what's going on. Hello cannot be resolved to a variable. Hello cannot be resolved. Essentially, that's telling me is it can't recognize hello. It's because it doesn't know what hello is. We are trying to display text, but because we forgot the text, it doesn't know that it's text. So we need to put that text, those quotes, back in there. We hit save and F11, and we'll get hello at the bottom of the screen. There we go. What if we only forgot one quote? Well, if we only forgot one quote, we run the program again. No, we don't want to proceed. Put our line over, and it says, string literal is not properly closed by a double quote. Well, that immediately tells me, hey, I'm missing a quote. Close the quote. Save, run the program again, and we have a functioning program. So what we can see here is that Eclipse does its best to try and tell us what the problem is when there is a problem. But again, it is an automated system. It's not perfect, so we do have to use some common sense. Sometimes it'll tell us there's a problem on one line, but it's really a line above it that may have caused the problem on that line. So if you don't see a problem on the line it tells you there is, look above it. Sometimes you don't have to go that far. Usually our problems as beginner programmers are usually forgot a quote, forgot a semicolon, missed a bracket, or misaligned one of your curly braces, or something along those lines. Usually it's something simple, spelling error, stuff like that. Anything like that can cause problems with our programs. So that's the basics of output. We now know system.out.println and system.out.print. Thanks for listening.